Persecuted but not forgotten. July 22nd marked 7,000 nights of captivity for two Eritrean pastors imprisoned with an estimated 400 Christians in the East African country. 7,000 nights. That's more than 19 years simply for preaching the gospel. Well, here to explain more about their imprisonment and the plight of Christians in the country, known as the North Korea of Africa, is VOM radio host Todd Nettleton. Todd, some churches and Christians are allowed to worship in Eritrea, but not these pastors. So tell us more. Who are they? Why are they still imprisoned?
Well, both of these pastors were part of the Full Gospel Church in Eritrea. Back in 2002, the government called in the leaders of most of the evangelical churches in the country and said, you are closed, no more public services. These churches and so many others immediately went underground. And shortly after that, Christians began to be arrested. And these pastors were arrested in 2004. As you say, more than 19 years later, they are still in prison. And just like the other 400 or so Christians in prison in Eritrea right now, they've never actually even been charged with a crime. They've never had a trial. They've never had a lawyer. They don't know how long they'll be in prison. There is no prison sentence. They just disappeared into the Eritrean prison system. And now here we are 19 later, they're still there.
Now, you've met with Eritrean Christians, so tell us what they've told you about the persecution that they've been forced to endure.
You know, one of the amazing things is the faithfulness of our Eritrean brothers and sisters. And they say persecution is not sweet, but it is useful. God is using persecution in that country to purify and to build his church. And their ministry goes on. In fact, several years ago, there was a report that the Eritrean government had actually built a new prison, and they were putting all of the Christians in the same prison to keep them from evangelizing other prisoners in other prisons. So they saw this as a way of isolating the Christians, but instead it was bringing them together, allowing them to fellowship with each other. But that tells you that their ministry in prison was going on. They were still sharing the gospel in spite of being in prison.
Now, earlier they were kept in boxcars, railroad cars, also containers, and then also underground. Tell us about that.
Yeah, there are Eritrean Christians that have been kept for many months in metal shipping containers. Helen Berhane is probably one of the best known, an Eritrean worship leader and singer, kept in a metal shipping container. Other Christians have talked about being held in underground prison cells with no light, literally 24 hours a day in the pitch darkness. So these are very miserable prison conditions for these two brothers and for other Christians in prison in Eritrea.
Todd, I'm sure some people would say, well, how can you possibly compare Eritrea to North Korea? Because no churches are allowed in North Korea other than maybe a few state-run show churches. And at least Eritrea allows Orthodox, Catholic, and Lutheran Christians to freely worship. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I would point out that even the legally sanctioned churches, like the Orthodox Church, are still persecuted. In fact, the patriarch of the Orthodox Church died in custody of the Eritrean government. So that level of control, the president of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki, was educated in China. So he has that kind of communist background of religion is bad, religion is not to be trusted. And so he is seeking to control or close down every church in Eritrea. And I think that's why we can compare it. The other thing is the long prison sentences and the fact that there is no legal recourse, there is no trial, there is no lawyer. People just disappear into the prison system, similar to how they do in North Korea.
So what can we do to help these pastors and the other imprisoned Christians? Is our government able to do anything about it?
Well, I would encourage people to do two things. One is pray, and we always say that prayer is the most powerful response that we have to the persecution of our brothers and sisters. In this case, we're also encouraging people to contact the Eritrean embassy and let them know, hey, let these pastors out of prison, let them go. We want them to know this is not something that is happening in secret in the dark. This is something the world is aware of, the world is paying attention to. And so I would encourage people, send an email, send a fax, make a phone call, let the Eritrean government know through their embassy in your country that the world is aware of how they are persecuting our Christian brothers and sisters.
And what have they said to you, Todd, about the power of prayer and what a difference that makes for them, those that have been in prison and are out that you've talked with?
You know, I have heard so many amazing stories from Christians in prison of how God's presence is so real to them and such an encouragement to them, and how they know that they're being prayed for. One of the things I often pray for persecuted Christians, and I would encourage people to pray for Pastor Haile and Dr. Kuflu, is pray that they'll know they're being prayed for, that the Holy Spirit will reveal to them, hey, right at this moment, right now, somebody is praying for you, because I know that will be an encouragement to them.
Okay, Todd Nettleton, host of the Voice of the Martyrs weekly radio program, VOM Radio. Todd, where can they hear the show?
VOMradio.net is the website. You can find any podcast service. You can find a local radio station. All of that, VOMradio.net.
All across America. Thank you for serving the persecuted church, and thanks for being with us, Todd. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's always good to talk to you, Gary.